Thank you for joining us for this bonus episode. Let's join this interview in progress.
Okay, Ken, what can we do to better be advocates of the Second Amendment? I'll answer for you to start with.
Go right ahead.
Order this book off Amazon. Arguing About Guns, Ken Baumgarten. I've been saying your name wrong for years.
You and everybody else.
Order this book from Amazon by Ken Baumgarten, Arguing About Guns. Now back to the question. What can we do better to be better advocates for the Second Amendment?
Sure.
Now back to the question. What can we do better to be better advocates for the Second Amendment?
Sure. The first thing is, I'm someone who detests being surprised. So when someone comes at you with a position on firearms or on the Bill of Rights, on the Second Amendment, on government and power, whatever that is, don't be surprised. Be prepared. So have the conversation before the conversation happens. Know how you would address this issue or that issue. An assault, a quote, assault weapons ban, inner city crime versus family annihilators and school shooters and things like that. How would you address that if someone wanted to talk about it? The time to figure that out is not in the moment when you get the deer in the headlights glazed look on your face and have to try and recall information. Know in advance how you would address that issue, because the narrative that's overwashing people on a day-to-day basis is equipping them to speak to the issue. They may be speaking to it erroneously, their facts may be off base, but the only way you're going to be ready to address that is if you've given it some forethought. What is your position? How do you know that that position is valid, that it would make a difference? When you talk about legislation, when you talk about prosecutors and plea bargaining and things like that, how did you arrive at that position? Statistics, we all have heard said before, there's lies, damn lies in statistics.
Mark Twain.
Yes, sir. But the plural of anecdote is data. So when you put some stories together and when you have some numbers together, you can confront the narrative with data. You should be prepared to say to someone, you're all hot and bothered about long guns, but did you know that there's 100 deaths by handgun for every one long gun death, and that the gun of choice in street crime is a handgun that was acquired illegally? Did you know that? Because if you know that, maybe you'd be less hot and bothered about taking away somebody's plinker that they're shooting targets with their kid with on Saturday afternoon. Because that guy, statistically, is not the problem. But you can't have the argument if you don't know that it's coming, and if you haven't thought about it, and if you haven't clarified for yourself what your position is.
Camera wife, I want you to recite one of my favorite sayings.
The illusion of intelligence is simply thinking ahead.
I did that and never moved my lips.
Absolutely.
And that's what this is about.
It is.
You read this book and you realize when somebody blurts out one of these stupid statements that is on its face wrong, but they've heard it so many times they believe it. Mm-hmm. This book gives you a platform to be prepared.
Yes.
For those statements, arguments, stupid things.
That was my intent, and that was my hope.
You did well. This book should be selling. I
want to go back around and repeat something I said earlier, if that's okay. A lot of people in our country think there are two types of folks with guns, police and criminals. And if you believe that, there's no reason for you to not hear that narrative day in and day out and just accept that those are facts. So a lot of folks have never known someone who is a gun owner, whether they're a hunter or not, that's not particularly relevant, and they don't realize that a lot of their friends and neighbors are gun owners. They don't know that when they're in the grocery store, statistically, in a place like where we live, there are multiple people in the grocery store with you that have a concealed firearm with them while they're shopping.
Legally.
And there's no reason whatsoever to panic about that.
Right.
They're not the problem.
They are safer with them in the store than without them.
And so back to that notion that if you only know that police and criminals have guns, you're not going to understand that maybe that narrative isn't giving you the whole picture. That your barber has guns, your grocer has guns, your pastor has guns, the nurse that is giving your mom her medication might have a Lady Smith revolver in her purse, in her locker. The world is blanketed. Remember, 400 million in the hands of 100 million legal gun owners who are never going to commit a crime with their gun. But if you don't know that, you're not prepared with information. So we've got to be ready to sit down and say, here are the facts. 400 million guns in the hands of 100 million legal gun owners who haven't committed any gun crimes and are never going to commit a gun crime. And someone who tells you that everyone with a gun is a danger to you is lying to you.
I carry every day. And the reason I carry every day, I'm a big, healthy guy. Well, I'm a big, strong guy. I'm not
You could have stopped earlier.
Yeah, I'm
a big guy.
I started carrying every day. There was a murder-suicide down here at the grocery store. Oh man, that's been 10, 12, 15 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And it was a state trooper, a fired state trooper, mm-hmm. was banned from having guns, mm-hmm. got a shotgun, went in the store, killed his wife, then turned a gun on himself. That day, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, you know, if you or I were there and we were carrying, we might have stopped the first murder. Mm-hmm. That would have been the ideal thing. The concept that I carry because I'm worried about getting beat up by some street fight, I'm really not. But it's the great equalizer. Mm-hmm. And if somebody has a gun, I don't want to say, you shouldn't do that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get hurt. Mm-hmm. I study all the time. I try to learn. But after everything I've learned, I realize myself and everybody around me is safer if I'm carrying a weapon.
I write about that story in the book about the
yes,
former trooper.
Yes.
And the reality is, I like to ask people this question. Do you know that website that tells you the time and place of the next terrible event?
Yeah, some psychic has it, and they're all wet.
Right, neither do I.
Yeah, no.
Neither do
Yeah.
I. So since I don't know when the next terrible event is going to happen and where it's going to happen, I can't necessarily avoid it. And I'm not seeking it out. I don't want to participate in anything terrible. I raised my children telling them, when there are stupid people doing stupid things in stupid places, be somewhere else. Don't be there. But sometimes that's not an option. Sometimes you're just going about your day-to-day life and something terrible breaks out. And in a battery change break, I think we use the phrase, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Yeah. And I hope that neither of us ever has to fire a shot in anger. But if something terrible happens, I don't want to be at the whim of an evil person who doesn't have any regard for my life or the lives of people around me.
Or his own. Because quite frankly, I'm not even going there.
No. Well, annihilators go with the intent to die.
Yeah.
So if you're in a place where someone decides they're going to the grocery store or to the mall to kill as many people as possible, that person has already, by and large, decided they're not surviving the event. So you should not expect them to... there was a politician who once said, if you see a shooter and you have a gun, you should put yours down, because when he realizes that you're not a threat, he'll put his down. And I thought, check please, it's time for me to get out of here. This person is
And
insane.
this guy's an elected official.
Right,
Wow.
exactly. So none of us want to see anything terrible happen, but because I don't know when and where terrible things will happen, I should take steps to protect myself, the people I love, and even an endangered stranger, if that's possible, because that's the decent thing to do, is to not let evil prevail if you can prevent it.
Yep. Earlier, we touched on this, but since your book came out, has the media changed its tactics on how it views gun-related crime and gun incidents?
If it's changed, it's only sort of enhanced. So they're doing the same thing, they're just doing it a little more aggressively, and I think it's part of that thing I mentioned of sort of the consolidation. When you have more voices, there's more room for dissent. But when the voices that are speaking are being dictated to by a corporate structure, there is the approved message, and that's what gets put out there. So it doesn't matter. I mentioned the signing ceremony and saying, well, this will save lives, God willing. Well, if you're a reporter, if you're not someone who reads a teleprompter for a corporate entity, but if you're an actual reporter, you would think you would say, Mr. President, it sounds to me like you're not sure that this legislature will save lives. Why would you need to hope that God will intervene via this legislature, this piece of legislature? But that's not going to happen, because the person who asks that question is not going to be reading the teleprompter on national television tomorrow.
No, he'll be put right in obits till he's
Right.
sick and tired and goes to some little tiny town that needs a weatherman.
Right. I mentioned in the book a Dan Rather interview of Al Gore many, many years ago during a presidential campaign when Vice President Gore, seeking to become President Gore, talked about teenagers being able to walk into a Walmart and buy a Glock and walk out with it at a time when Glock didn't sell handguns, when no state in the country allowed a teenager to purchase a handgun, and that there were background checks for all handguns in all 50 states. Mr. Rather never asked a question, didn't push back. The story went out without any commentary that said, we looked into it, we sent a reporter to Walmart, and in fact you cannot buy a handgun. So that was the way it was. I would love to say that there's more to it today, but you and I live in a world polluted with fact checkers. Everywhere I look, I hear about fact checkers.
Anytime I see fact checker come up in something I see on Facebook, I'm like, oh, this must be more true than they want to admit.
And so why is it that when someone purports or reports an incident or an event, there's no fact check to say, well, it turns out that it couldn't be the way they said it, because this, in that state, you cannot purchase a gun at 19 years old. That it's not possible. What you just said happened couldn't have happened. And a simple fact check would verify that.
I did see some honest reporting. Some reporter went to a gun show and tried to buy a gun at a gun show.
Yes.
And found out you can't do that.
Right.
And it was refreshing. Unfortunately, it was only once or twice I've seen that.
Right.
That's the rarity, not the rule.
Right. And why is it rare? Because it doesn't support the narrative. And
Ken, are there trends that are happening in the realm we're talking about that give you hope today?
Absolutely. For a long time, the entree into the firearms lifestyle, if that is such a thing, or just gun ownership, was hunting. Today, that's no longer the case. Hunting is on the decline, even though there's a little bit of pocket resurgences here and there. But the shooting sports are doing a fantastic job of reaching out to young people, to across all sorts of demographics, and helping them understand that this isn't an old white male hobby, that doesn't matter where you're from or how old you are or whether you're a man or a woman. This is a lot of fun. It's interesting, and if you care about your family, as part of the positive trend that came out of the negative trends, is people realize I had better be in a position to look out for my family and myself, because sometimes things get sideways like that, and if I'm not prepared, I'm going to be caught with empty hands and perhaps a tragedy. So that's good stuff. We're seeing young people get involved, participate in shooting sports, and they're recognizing that what they had once believed or what they had been told was just not true. These are not a bunch of drunken yahoos shooting up the countryside. These are skilled, trained, conscientious people who engage in education and safety training and are salt of the earth, rational, reasonable people. And that's a real positive.
You seem like one.
I try to. At least I try to play one on YouTube.
Okay.
But that's a great achievement to see young people get out there and say, this is not just something from bygone days. This is not just something for the hill people. That this is a right, a civil right, and it's the only backstop. You know, Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration, I'm going to paraphrase, he said, decent people have a duty to overthrow indecent government. And decent people recognize that that's not some other class. That's the folks that they go to work with, that's their next door neighbors, that's their family members, and that's a positive trend for people to say, I have to be ready to take responsibility for my family, for my community, for my country, and this is one of the ways that was provided in our Constitution to do so.
Interesting enough, you mentioned several things there. First off, I'm a life member of NRA.
As am I.
Cool. I've never seen NRA promote mass shooting. I have seen NRA since I first heard about them when I was probably 12. When I first got my dad gave me my first gun. I still have that gun. NRA promotes shooting training, shooting classes, safety classes. They're not this evil thing. Right. That they want the sport, and it is a sport, to be safe. Right. And that people be trained. You know, we don't do enough shooting now because of the price of ammunition. But we're going to actually do some training here not too long because my wife got a new gun for Valentine's Day.
Woo-hoo!
That's a romantic right there.
The fact of we need to be conscious about self-preservation, protecting ourselves, not just from a tyrannical government, but from your door. How close is the nearest state police station?
Well, there used to be one about 4.5 miles up the road from me, but they closed it down.
Right.
So at this point, if you were lucky enough that there was a trooper driving around in the area, you might get a response within 7 to 15 minutes. But if he's not nearby, he or she is not nearby, you might be looking at a half an hour of response time.
Yeah. The nearest barracks is, I'm going to say, as a crow flies, 15 miles.
And generally speaking, the state troopers aren't sitting at the barracks.
No.
So it's... You know.
Yes, it's a crapshoot.
Can I circle back around to
Sure.
the NRA for a second? This is important for the narrative and for you being prepared to argue about the importance of not just gun rights, but of responsibilities. The NRA, many, many years ago, started a program called Eddie the Eagle. And Eddie the Eagle was like a McGruff the Crime Dog costume that you could get, and you could go and take this ready-made training program into public schools, private schools, scout groups, children's arenas to do a gun safety training program. Specifically, if you're at your friend's house and your friend brings out a gun, what should you do? Leave the area, tell an adult. Very important information for kids to have. They also taught the 4 rules of gun safety that apply to adults as well as children. By and large across the country, the Eddie the Eagle program has been banned from school districts. They don't want Eddie the Eagle from the NRA to come in and tell kids how to be safe if a gun shows up, if they stumble upon one in the street, if a friend brings one out of his backpack, if they're at someone's house and a gun makes an appearance in the room. they don't want that training to take place because they don't want to normalize guns. Circling back, how many legal guns are there in the country?
400 million.
How many legal gun owners?
100 million.
There's legal guns everywhere.
Val and I are above average.
It is important for people to have training so that they can safely interact with those legal guns. But the narrative says only cops and bad guys have guns. So bringing Eddie the Eagle into the school is going to break that narrative and say, hey, when you go over for the sleepover at your friend's house, there may be guns in the house, and this is how you should relate to those guns. Mm-hmm. So the narrative is more important than the safety of children, and therefore they had to get Eddie the Eagle out of the schools.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Compressor Guru. Tune in next Friday for the third and final bonus episode featuring Ken Baumgarten and his book, Arguing About Guns. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you all next week. God bless.